What's up YouTube, Capital G here, checking out the brand new ProcessSlayer archetype that just got revealed. This is the first theme from the Mystic Fighters deck building booster set. You guys know I just talked about that set a couple of days ago. We had the Dragon Maids revealed. Well, their effects weren't revealed, but you know, the archetype itself. This booster set I believe is coming out in August in the OCG. We might get this before the end of the year, maybe November or something like that. Because Konami did reveal 13 cards for this archetype at once, I am not going to read over their effects. I just did that. The video ended up being 16 minutes. I'm like, whoa, that is way too long. So I'm basically just going to kind of summarize the cards and then kind of give my verdict on them. This archetype is completely Cyberse based, so my suggestion is pick up Cynet Minings now. Between this and Marine Sets, you'll probably need them. It's level 4 base, it's Synchro based, and it's Xyz based, and the playstyle of this archetype is very similar to like a lot of the Arc V fusion decks. To me, this is kind of like Ancient Gears done right. This archetype wants to go second, and you're looking to one-shot your opponent with extreme consistency. So, seems like a pretty cool deck. Let's start off by talking about the tuners. The first one is ProcessSlayer Sigma, and this is a monster that's really good. Basically, it allows you to special summon itself from your hand or the graveyard as long as you control no monsters in the extra monster zone. This monster is a tuner, but it can actually be treated as a non-tuner for the summoning of a ProcessSlayer monster, which is the extra deck cards. I don't think that effect is really all that relevant. The main thing about this card that's good is that it's discard fodder. I mean, you're probably playing Cynet Mining in this deck. You're going second almost certainly, so you're probably playing things like Twin Twister. You can discard, and then obviously you can summon it back from your graveyard or for free, and then obviously you don't need to like use your normal summon. You can summon it from your hand as well, so you know, never having to use your normal summon to get monsters on board, obviously pretty strong. The next tuner is ProcessSlayer Nabla. This is Lonefire Blossom for the archetype, which, I mean, just on that face value alone, the card's already amazing. This card is also really good because it kind of makes the OTKs for the archetype even more consistent. When you do actually, or when it's sent to the graveyard, you can take one of your ProcessSlayer monsters from the extra monster zone. That monster can attack twice on the monsters, so you're making your OTKs even better, in my opinion, making them even more consistent, making that monster hit harder. The main thing about this card is its Lonefire Blossom. You can tribute any Cyberse monster, and then you can just summon like a ProcessSlayer monster from your deck. So who doesn't love Lonefire Blossom for an archetype? Like, just an easy bona fide 3 of, in my opinion. The only thing is you're probably gonna have to normal summon the card. Next up is ProcessSlayer Addion and ProcessSlayer Subtra. I'll do these two simultaneously because they're mirror images of each other. They basically have the same exact effect. Both of them target a card that is already on the field, and then one of them makes the monster gain 1,000 attack. The other one makes the monster lose 1,000 attack, and then each one of these guys special summon themselves. Now, the thing about the ProcessSlayers and all of these cards that special summon themselves from like the graveyard in hand, they do lock you into the Cyberse type for the extra deck. Like, you cannot go into, you know, Exoton Knight or something like that. You have to go into Cyberse monsters when you're going into the extra deck, but that's really not the point. The point is that these cards can all just special summon themselves, and these two monsters in particular cannot attack during the turn that they special summon themselves, but again, who really cares? The point of this deck is to get that Synchro Monster on field and one-shot your opponent with it. I think that, you know, the first one, the Addion, it's really good because if you can make your Synchro have 1,000+ attack, it becomes even easier to one-shot your opponent. Next up is ProcessSlayer Multiplier, which is one of the best main deck monsters for this archetype. It has 2 effects. The first one lets you take a level 4 Cyberse monster and make it level 8 until the end of the turn. That's excellent because this archetype does have a level 12 Synchro monster, and by using this effect, you don't have to use 3 monsters. You can target one of your level 4 tuners, make it level 8, boom, you have a 2-card level 12 Synchro. And then the second effect is when it's sent to the graveyard, you can target a Cyberse monster in the extra monster zone, and you make that card attack become double until the end of the turn. That's where the whole one-shot your opponent comes from. I mean, you're summoning big boss monsters and then you're doubling the attack of them. Seems pretty damn easy to one-shot your opponent when you're doing that, especially when you have ways of making your guys get multiple attacks on monsters. So it's an excellent card, obviously a 3 of, because it helps one-shot your opponents and it helps you go straight into the biggest of the boss monsters in this archetype. The last main deck monster is probably the only monster that I don't think you need to run. It's ProcessSlayer Division. This is one that lets you tribute a ProcessSlayer monster in the extra monster zone, or really a Cyberse monster in the extra monster zone. It lets you special summon a ProcessSlayer monster from your graveyard in your hand. I mean, that's cute, I guess. I don't really think that I would want to give up my ProcessSlayer in the extra monster zone for that. And when this guy is sent to the graveyard, you half a monster's attack that's on the field. Again, I mean, that can kind of be good against your opponent's monsters, but quite frankly, I would rather make my monsters stronger than debuff my opponent's monsters. So let's go ahead and look at the synchros for this archetype, because there are two of them. One of them is kind of like a semi-boss monster, and then the other is the true boss monster of the deck. The first is the level 8 Synchro Monster, which, I mean, I think everybody expected a level 8 Synchro considering that everything is level 4 in this archetype. The ProcessSlayer Magma, it has 2500 attack. It is completely generic. All the monsters in this archetype are completely generic when it comes to the extra deck monsters. They all have 0 defense, which is really weird. It kind of is reminiscent of like zombies. It's really kind of a utility card. If it runs over a monster by battle, you get to target up to 2 cards on your opponent's side of the field and then destroy those cards. Destruction might start coming back in Yu-Gi-Oh, considering that a lot of these archetypes Konami has revealed in the last week seem very, very destruction based. The second effect is just a standard floating effect, where if it dies by card effect or if your opponent runs it over by battle, it allows you to add any of these spells and traps from the ProcessSlayer archetype and add them straight to your hand. So overall, it's a pretty solid card. The level 12 is the true boss monster and win condition of this archetype. And by the way, the level 8 is also a Synchro Monster, so it can actually go into the level 12. 3000 attack, completely generic, as I said before. When it's in the extra monster zone, it's unaffected by your opponent's card effects, except other ProcessSlayer cards. So basically, if you're not playing a mirror match, it's Apocalypse Fort Towers, as long as it's in the extra monster zone, which is actually pretty damn crazy. Konami really giving us a whole lot of Towers clones in like the last week. The second effect does double battle damage as long as it's in the extra monster zone. Again, this is why one-shotting your opponent is just so easy in this deck. This guy is 3000 attack. If you use the multiplier, it jumps to 6000 attack, and then it does double battle damage, and it's just a really easy way to one-shot your opponent. The third effect is the kind of floating effect, where if it's sent to the graveyard by your opponent's battle, card effect, whatever, then it actually floats into any card in the archetype from your deck to your hand. This is a solid win condition, and to me, the most impressive thing about this card is with the multiplier, you can summon it for just 2 cards. Like, that's what to me makes this archetype seem really legitimate. I'm summoning a Towers from my extra deck. It's 3000 attack. It does double battle damage, and if I use multiplier, it's 6000 attack and double battle damage. Like, this is definitely the one-shot your opponent deck. Next up is the Xyz for this archetype, which, to be honest, it should just kind of be named ProcessSlayer TRISHULA, because that's essentially what this card is. It is a rank 4 that requires 3 monsters to summon. When it's Xyz summoned, you can detach materials, then activate effects based on how many materials you detach. You get to send 1 card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. You can also send a monster your opponent controls to the graveyard, or you can send a spell or trap card they control to the graveyard. Well, I shouldn't say or, I should say and. Keep in mind, none of these effects target, which is why this card is similar to TRISHULA. Also, the fact is, this card lets you remove 3 cards from your opponent, which again is very reminiscent of TRISHULA. Now, you don't have to detach all the materials. You can just detach 2. You can take a card out of your opponent's hand, and you can take a monster from their field, and then you can use the protection effect. The protection effect is basically Dengirsu. If one of your ProcessSlayer cards would be destroyed by a card effect, detach a material instead, and you get the protection. So this is an excellent card, and honestly, I think that it might even see play in just other decks that can summon rank 4s, because it basically is TRISHULA. Like, it's an amazing freaking card. They have a monster reborn called ProcessSlayer Formula. It summons a ProcessSlayer monster, or a ProcessSlayer. It can summon the extra deck cards from your graveyard and gives it 1000 attack. This is another impressive card. Basically, I would imagine when you synchro summon, bring back one of your dudes, give it 1000 attack so that you have, even more damage. It's a hard once per turn on the card, but honestly, I would probably still run 3 of this card because I kind of want to get to it incredibly fast. Next up is the equip spell for the archetype, which is actually really good. The second effect is just kind of a generic floating effect. It's Warrior Returning Alive for any of your ProcessSlayer cards. When this card is sent from the spell and trap zone to the graveyard, the next effect, or kind of like the real effect, and this card can only be equipped as Cyberse monsters, so you can't really splash this card in a bunch of decks, but it allows you to send one of your ProcessSlayer ProcessSlayer monsters from the deck to the graveyard, and then the equipped monster gains that monster's attack during damage calculation. Basically, this is just kind of a way of giving your level 12 Synchro a little more damage. Most of the time, you're just going to be gaining 1000 attack, which doesn't really sound like a lot, but keep in mind the level 12 Synchro does do double battle damage, and when its attack is doubled, you could be talking about having a 7000 attack monster that does double battle damage. Like, that's a lot of times how you one-shot your opponent. There are 2 traps in this archetype, and quite frankly, these are not bad cards. It's just, I don't really think that you need traps in this deck. Maybe impermanence, maybe things like Red Reboot since you're trying to go second and one-shot your opponent, but I just feel like traps in this archetype are unnecessary. Even if this archetype had an Infernity Barrier, I'm not certain that it would be random multiples, but the first one is ProcessSlayer Induction. It's a continuous trap. It gives your Cyberse monsters 500 attack, and then it has an effect where if you control a ProcessSlayer monster, you can send it to the graveyard, and you can pop a card on your opponent's side of the field. Again, it's pretty solid if the game goes into turn 2 and 3, but ideally with this archetype, your games are supposed to last like 2 turns most. You're basically looking to one-shot your opponent. So this is a nice spot removal card. Maybe you could run it as a one-of. The next card is kind of like, what was that archetype, Heraldic Beast? I think that was they had a card just like this. It was a spell. Basically, it allows you to target up to 3 ProcessSlayer monsters with different names, and then you can either synchro summon with them immediately, or you can actually Xyz summon. If you synchro summon, the cards go to your deck, not to the graveyard. Again, probably like a one-of at max. If you don't one-shot your opponent, this allows you to go basically right into the synchro level 12 again during your next turn and have another opportunity. I just don't think that you know, traps would work all that well in a deck that always is going to blind second and always wants to end the game turn 1. But honestly, the trap cards are not bad. Like, they're solid cards. I just think that they're unnecessary because of how we're going to build the deck. But whatever you guys think of ProcessSlayers, leave it in the comment section below. Again, I apologize I wasn't able to read the effects, but honestly, squeezing 13 cards into a video is quite difficult, so I just kind of had to do the video like this. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.